Good evening, boys and girls. I hope you are ready because we are here tonight for some scary stories. I hope you're ready. My first story that I'm going to tell you is about a young couple. They lived a very long time ago, and one night they were out on a date. They lived in a very small town, but there was a train track that went right through town. On their way home from a date one evening, they were just coming into town and over the railroad tracks, and their car stopped. The young man tried to get it started again. He was only a little concerned. His car did not always work the best. So he tried to start it, and it just wouldn't go. The young girl looked out the window, and she thought in the distance that there was a sound almost like a train whistle, but she wasn't sure. It was still so very far away. Now, little did they know that the train had a very young train conductor on it, and he was also having trouble with the train. He could not get the lights to work. He had called ahead to the next station to tell them that he was having a problem and that they would need to be ready to help him, but he just could not get the lights to work. As they sat on the tracks, the young girl was starting to get a little nervous. It was very dark outside, and she looked down. She couldn't see anything coming, for it was so dark. She listened out the window, and she thought she heard the train was coming. She looked to the young man and said, "Hurry, hurry, the train is coming, the train is coming." He said, "I'll try one more time, and then we have to get out of the car." He went to start the car, and it started. They were so excited. The young girl looked back out the window, but it was too late. The lights came on of the train just as it came to the track and hit their vehicle. Fortunately, the young couple did not make it. The town was very upset about it. It was a very small town, and everyone drove those tracks almost every day in and out of town. Many years later, the town still thought about the young couple. They would sometimes put flowers out near the crossing. There was another young couple, and this was many, many years later, and they didn't even know the story of the older couple. They were driving home from a date, went over the tracks, and his car stopped. They thought, "Oh my goodness, what are we going to do?" And he tried to get the car started. The girl looked out the window, doesn't see anything, they don't hear anything. They assume they'll be fine. Now, little did they know that the very same train conductor was operating a train again that evening, and he was once again having trouble with the lights. Now, he did not want to repeat what had happened the first time, the very first night he was a conductor and had that horrible accident. So this time he called ahead to the station ahead, and they said, "Just make sure you keep blowing your horn so that everyone can hear that you are coming." He agreed and went about his trip. He knew he was coming closer to town, and so he wanted to make sure that anyone near the tracks would hear him coming. He took the horn and he gave it a big, long blow so they would hear him. The girl became very concerned, for she had heard the train. And she said, "You must start the car, we have to get out." Just as the train was coming up to the crossing, the light went on and the couple's car drove off the tracks. They were so pleased to have gotten off the tracks. They jumped out of the car and ran to each other to embrace. The young girl commented how she was so thankful that the boy was able to start his car. However, he said he had not been able to start his car. He didn't know what happened. All he knew is that the car was no longer on the tracks. They walked to the back of the vehicle, and along the back bumper there were 2 sets of handprints. Now, no one really knows how that car got off the tracks that night, but anyone who had lived in town a long time and remembered the night of the horrible accident knows, or thinks they know, that it was the young couple keeping an eye on the track so that no one would ever have an accident as horrible as theirs.
I have a very, very scary story to tell you. Are you ready? This story takes place long time ago, far north, where the winter is 6 months long. Now, this particular winter was really rough, and in a little village lived an old man and an old woman. Their cottage was just far enough away where it took a long time to get into town. They were slowly starting to run low on firewood. And the old woman turned to her husband and said, "Oh, husband, I'm so cold and I'm so hungry. Have we anything to eat?" The husband looked all over their pantry and they had nothing. He said, "Don't worry, wife. I know that this winter is hard, but I will try my best and I will go out and I will hunt for some food for us and bring us more wood. You stay here and keep the fire going. I'll return as quick as I can." So the old man got all of his hunting stuff together and he went out into the frigid winter to find food and more firewood. Now, the old woman was all by herself in the cottage, and she was so cold and so hungry. All she had was warm water to drink. So she sat by the fire and kept it going. And now a day had passed, and her husband still hadn't returned. And then another day, and then another day. And slowly she realized there was only 2 logs left to keep the fire going. By this time, she was so hungry. All she had was warm water. So she started to bundle herself up, and she couldn't decide what to do. She looked around and tried to scrape around for food, but nothing. So she thought, maybe I'll go outside and try to get more firewood. So she picked up the axe and cut herself. And she put her finger in her mouth and went, this tastes pretty good. And she began to nibble on her finger just a little bit. Well, she started to feel better, so she kept nibbling, and slowly she ate all the fingers on her right hand. But she didn't stop there. She kept going and biting and nibbling and going, "Oh, that feels so much better. I feel warmer and my belly feels full." But she kept eating and eating and eating until she was nothing but a skeleton. Now, the old man was on his way back to the cabin, and he had caught 5 rabbits for them, and he had so many bundles of wood. It was taking him forever to get back. As he approached the cottage, he noticed there was no fire going. And he got worried, so he ran to the door and he dropped the wood at the door and he burst through. And he saw a shadow of a woman sitting in front of the empty fireplace. And he said, "Wife, I've returned. I have food and firewood." And he got closer and closer, and he could just barely hear her. And when he finally walked around and saw her, she jumped up and said, "I'm hungry for meat," and lunged at the old man. He threw the rabbits and started running out of the cottage. screaming as he ran, "Wife, what has happened? Wife, what happened? Where are you?" And she screamed back, "I am your wife." And she chased him through the woods, screaming, "I'm hungry, give me meat." The old man was scared. He realized it was his wife, but she didn't look the same. She was a chewed up skeleton, screaming at the top of her lungs. She needed meat. So the old man kept running, and finally he got to a ravine, and there was a very tiny plank of wood that he had to cross. He could hear the skeleton lady approaching, crunching through the snow, and he knew what he had to do. So he got on his hands and knees on the log and crossed the gorge to the other side. And then, out of the woods, the old lady approached. A big, scary skeleton, shrieking, "I want meat!" The old man was scared. All she had to do was cross that little bridge, and she would eat him. He had nowhere to go. So he stood back and he waited and he braced himself, and the old lady started to cross. But she was a skeleton, and it was a harsh winter with a lot of wind. She didn't crawl across the log like the old man. She stood up like a scary skeleton. And then the wind swept her off the log, and she crashed into the bottom of the ravine and broke into 100 little pieces. But on her way down, she still screamed, "I'm hungry. I want meat. I will eat you."
I have one more story for you this evening. This story is of a young girl who was home alone for the first time. She was so excited that her parents decided she was old enough to stay home. They had an event in the city, and they would be gone overnight, but would be home first thing in the morning. And she would be staying home with their dog Bruno. They felt sure that she would be fine. After she made herself something to eat for dinner, she was laying on the couch before she was going to head up to bed, scrolling through on her phone, when she saw a story of a robbery in the next town over. The police were still out looking, and they were saying if anyone saw anything suspicious to make sure to contact the police. She was a little nervous, but told herself she was not concerned. She would be fine. She decided she might as well head upstairs, get Bruno their dog, and just tuck in for the night. She checked all the doors and windows, made sure everything was locked, and went to go call for Bruno when she heard him walking upstairs. So she knew he was there already. She went upstairs into her bedroom and saw the shadow of Bruno under the bed, right where he always slept. So she knew he was ready and waiting for her. She curled up into bed and leaned down and said, "Thank you, Bruno. Thank you for keeping me safe." She put her hand down and pat his head. He nuzzled her hand, gave her a little lick. It was just like always. She laid in bed for a little while and tossed and turned and was really having trouble sleeping. She leaned down again and said, "Thank you, Bruno. Thank you so much for keeping me safe." Rubbed his head, and he nuzzled her hand, gave her a little lick. She finally was able to fall asleep. The next morning, when her mother and father returned, her mother came up to the bedroom to wake her up, said, "Darling, how are you? How was your night? Were you okay?" And she said, "I was fine. I did become a little frightened when I heard about the robbery, but I was okay. I was brave. The mother said, well, darling, if you were scared and nervous, why did you leave Bruno outside in his doghouse? You should have brought him in to sleep with you. And she said, but mother, I did. He slept underneath my bed the whole night, just as he always does. The mother became concerned and slowly leaned over to check under the bed. Under the bed, she found a note. When she pulled the note out, she looked at it, and in shaky handwriting, it said, thank you for keeping me safe from the police. P.S. Who is Bruno?
The last story I have to tell for you tonight might be a familiar one. This is called The Telltale Heart. I didn't hate the old man. In fact, I loved him dearly. I didn't wish to steal from him. He was a nice enough old man. But there was something about him. It was his eye. You see, he had one eye, like the eye of a vulture. It was pure white. You could see through it practically. Now every night, the old man would go to bed, and I would wait outside of his bedroom until he was asleep. And I would peek in with my little lantern, just open it enough so the light would be casted right on his eye. You see, I thought that I was magical. I thought that I could see even when he was asleep. So every night I would creep to his door with my lantern and peek the light onto his eye, and it would always be closed. Now I did this for a few nights, but on the 8th night, when I peeked in, foolish me, I wasn't paying attention. I slowly opened the door. I put my lantern up and I waited. I could hear him softly snoring. I knew he was asleep. So I went to open the lantern just a little bit to let that tiny bit of light through. And of course, me being clumsy, I fumbled the lantern, and the old man shot up in his bed. Who's there? I hear you. Who's there? I stayed really quiet. I didn't open the lantern, and I didn't move. But I heard something. It was a thumping. It was the old man's heart. And I could hear it beating faster and faster. And I knew that he was scared. So I stayed in place and I didn't move and I didn't make a sound. But the old man, his heart, it beat faster. And I could hear him screaming, "Who's there? I hear you, who's there?" And now, his heart was beating so fast, it was almost as if death was upon him. Then, I heard a noise, a little crash, a clutter, as if he was trying to get out of bed. And then, it was quiet. So I opened my lantern. And there it was, the eye, open, staring at me. And I shook and I shuddered, but then I realized the old man wasn't moving. So, quickly, I ran to the side of the bed, threw the lantern open all the way, and got to work. You see, the old man never left his house. He was a bit of a recluse. So I decided I was just going to get rid of his body. So I pulled up the floorboards in the bedroom and I stuffed him inside and I put the floorboards back. And that was that. Now, hours later, when the sun started to rise, there was a knock at the door. I went down and I opened the door, and there were 2 police officers. I said, "Good evening, police officers. What can I do for you?" My heart began to beat a little fast. See, I knew what happened in the house, but I was hoping they didn't. The police stepped in and said, "Our neighbors heard a loud scream last night. Just wanted to come over and check on the old man." Well, I quickly made up a lie. "Oh, he's actually not in. He actually went on a short vacation to go visit his sister." So the police were okay with that answer, but they said, "We just want to take a look around." So I, thinking I finally beat them, let them into the house, and I even started showing them around, room to room to room. Now that the old man's gone, all of this was mine. All of the things in the house, all of his gold, everything belonged to me. Finally, we got up to the upstairs. In fact, we went right into the old man's bedroom, and there we stood, talking. They were remarking on how beautiful the inside of the house was, how old it was. I stood there for a moment because I heard something strange. I heard a thumping. Now, I thought I was going crazy. What possibly could be thumping? Only I was in the house and the 2 police officers. But as they were chatting, it grew louder. And it kept thumping and thumping and thumping. And then I realized it was the old man's heart. Now I got worried because if I heard it, surely they heard it. And so I tried to make noise as we walked around the room and moved things and talked louder and louder and louder just to try to drown out the thumping. Now the police, they started to get a little suspicious. Started to get curious. Why was I walking around and talking louder and louder? So one of the police officers said, "Are you all right?" And now I knew, they surely knew. And so panicked, I yelled, "I did it! I killed him and he's buried in the floorboard! Can't you hear his heart beating?" Now the police were scared and they jumped back. And sure enough, they pulled up the floorboards and there was the old man with his one vulture eye open, staring back. Now they say I went mad, but I know I heard the beating of the old man's heart. I hope those stories weren't too scary for you. Now, get into bed and sleep tight. And don't let the bed bugs bite. Have a very happy Halloween.